It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our question and answer panel. We have the zchus of having Rabbi Menachem Genack, who is the CEO and rabbinic administrator of Kosher, joining us. Rabbi Genack, are you there? We're not seeing you. And also, of course, Rabbi Hershel Schachter Shlita, who is the paistik for the OU, as well as I'm sure many of you are familiar. I'm sure the Yeshiva sees many of his Talmidim here in the audience today. We'll be discussing various questions and answers. So just need to wait for Rabbi Genack to come on. There we go. Okay. And Schachter, if you could unmute yourself also, that would be great.
Okay.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, thank you both Rabbi Genack and Schachter, for joining us today for the questions and answers. We have several questions that came in before, and I'll turn, I guess, to both of you if you want. I can direct it towards either one of you for the questions. But thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here, Rabbi Genack. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to start off with.
No, I just want to thank Eli Elif for doing a fantastic job putting this program together for the REACH students, and kol hakavod.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Rabbi Genack, I guess we'll start with you. The question came up with regards to dairy equipment, something that we get questions about every day, and people want to know, how do we determine if something's actually dairy or dairy equipment? And is it enough to check the ingredients and allergy labels, see if there's no dairy, or there's no more that needs to be done?
This is a question we get all the time. I think, the question that the OE gets more than any other question is, Oreo cookies powered or the dairy equipment? And the reason for that is that the Oreo cookies have OUD designation, and many of them, in fact, are PAV. So you really have to know the list of which Oreos was initially made in a plant in Chicago, and there was a time that they had both dairy and PAV on the same equipment. The standard Oreo, even though it's listed as OUD, is actually, in fact, PAV, not even dairy equipment, but there are lots of different kinds of Oreo. So the OU has a list which will make available to you. So that, at this point in history, is the most asked question. How do you know if something is dairy or dairy equipment if it says OUD? So the OU policy is, if it just says OU and doesn't say dairy, so then it's generally PAV. If it's OUD, often consumers will ask whether it's dairy equipment only, because if it's only dairy equipment, then you can eat it, for example, immediately after fleischiks without waiting 6 hours. So it's not so easy to know, because there can be components that are not listed in the ingredient panel that could be dairy, ingredients within the flavor. But so the OU is always available to accommodate you on those kind of questions. And if you just call the OU, Rabbi Nussbaum, who answers the question at the OU, or the rabbinical coordinator who handles that, will get back to you. The likelihood is, but you can't be certain, is if it says, very often indeed it's only dairy equipment, which doesn't necessarily generate a requirement to make it listed as dairy as an allergen. So these things really do require further checking.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess we'll turn to Schachter, and then Rabbi Genack also, if you wanted to pipe in for this. And we're getting some questions. A lot of Tevilas Keilim questions seems to be on people's mind, especially now with some of the mikvahs still being closed and things like that. And the first question we got is, if a Jewish-owned candy store is selling prepackaged candy in a platter that requires Tevilas Keilim, what's the best way to solve the Tevilas Keilim issue? And there's also, and I would add, people point out there are certain stores that sell pre-toiveled Keilim. Would such a thing work? And how would that work?
The obligation to do Tevilas Keilim only applies if it's a klei seuda. Let's say you buy a suit, so that doesn't need Tevilas Keilim. Or let's say you buy jewelry, Metal that doesn't need Tevilas Keilim, only if it's made to be used in a Suda. So recent posting came up with the Chiddush that if you have a store, in a store they're selling glasses or they're selling pots and pans. So by them it's not Oimid le Bishul, by them it's Oimid le Schachter. So they don't have to be Tevel. So therefore, these recent posting came up with the Chiddush that even if they're volunteer and they'll be Tevel, the Tefillah won't help. Only after the customer buys it. Then it's I made lachila. It's I made the forks and the knives, or I made to be used in lachila. So then you need Tevilas Keilim. So then if you do the tefillah, then you'll be it. But if the storekeeper will be tevel it before he sells it, in the store it's not I made to be used for eating. That's a shtikul chiddush. I don't know if everybody agrees to that, but that's the chumrah that they came up with in recent years. Yeah. Well, what was the first question that you asked? What do you do?
So it was about the thing, if it would need Tevilas Keilim, if you got a platter, if someone delivered to your house, say from a store, a candy platter, would that platter now require Tevilas Keilim?
Yeah, so let's say I have, I think Rabbi Gifter wrote this Shaila to the Sridiesh. I think the Tshuva the Sridiesh is to him. If you buy a can that has a corn, a peas or something, so why don't you have to empty out the can right away when you come home? You're using the can to hold food in it. That's also a hishtamshus for food purposes. So this Sridiesh writes that's considered hishtamshus b'shevi al tafse. If I put the food, if I take a fork and a knife and I cut up the food and I eat it, that's hishtamshus with the fork and a knife. The kumbi I say. Or if I take a frying pan that needs Tevilas Keilim and I fry something in it, or I buy, let's say, a glass container, and then I put some food in it, so that's hishtamshus b'kumbi I say, and a kli that needs Tevilas Keilim, so that you're not going to do. But if I buy the can from the store, it already has the food in it. So that's the food is there, it's sitting there. I didn't put it in. I'm not eating the food right now from the can. So that's called hishtamshus b'shevi al tas. Let's say if I'll buy a bottle with chocolate milk in it. So the chocolate milk is in the bottle. Let's say a glass bottle. Plastic, most assume that you don't need Tevilas Keilim. Here in Breuer's, Rabbi was machmed there are two kinds of plastic. Some plastic, if it breaks, it can fix. And sometimes it breaks, you throw it out. Sometimes you can melt it, sometimes not. He thought that the one that can be fixed, by melting it and fixing it, that needs Tevilas Keilim Rabban. And most poskim hold that the plastic doesn't need Tevilas Keilim at all. So let's say I buy chocolate in a bottle and a glass bottle. So a glass bottle needs Tevilas Keilim. But the whole hishtamshus is b'shevi al tas. I take the bottle home and I leave it in the refrigerator. When I want to drink from the bottle, so then that's already hishtamshus b'kumbi aseh. So that you shouldn't do. You should pour the milk from the glass bottle into a glass that you were tevel. So let's say I go to the candy store and I buy a glass tray that has candies in it already. So that's a hishtamshus b'shevi al tas. So when I put it on the table, so I'm not doing anything with kumbi aseh. I take some of the candies out. I'm not using the kli then. Then if you're drinking from a bottle, then you're using the kli, the kumbi aseh. But just to take out candies from the container, the hishtamshus of the container is to hold the candies that remain behind, the candies that were there that are remaining that I'm not eating. Those were there from before. So that's again hishtamshus b'shevi al tas. So after you finish eating all the candies and you want to use the kli again, or you finished eating a lot of them and it looks bad, it's half empty, you want to put more candies on, so then that's already hishtamshus b'kumbi aseh. So then you have to empty out all the candies, be tevel it in the mikveh. Breuer's mikveh has bromine in it. The mikveh is open to the public. The mikveh for Keilim. Anyone who wants can come to Breuer's and be tevel in the mikveh.
Okay, so just as a follow-up to a couple people asking questions about what the Rishiva just said, what about glass wine bottles, or if you drink with the straw of a glass bottle?
Wine bottles also, it's a hishtamshus b'shevi al tas, unless you're drinking from the bottle. But you don't drink from the bottle. You pour out some of the wine, and the wine that remains behind, that's called hishtamshus b'shevi al tas. If you empty it out all the wine, and now you want to pour in more wine in the bottle, You want to use the bottle for other mashkim. So now mikan al habad, that'll be his tamshas b'kumi asay. So that you need Tevilas Keilim for. Okay.
So, Rabbi Genack, once the Shiva spoke now about Tevilas Keilim, a lot of questions are being asked. What's the OU's policy with regards to acquiring Tevilas Keilim by caterers, restaurants, hotels, or even companies, especially those Keilim that, for example, are not possible to really put into a mikvah?
So the OU policy is that, actually, I answered this when I came, because before we were making about that restaurants and so on, that we require, and caterers that require Tevilas Keilim if it's Jewish owned, and we don't rely on the cooler that is called Kli Schoira, and we require in all of them Tevilas Keilim. If it's a Kli that Jewish owned and you can't be toivel, it's very large or something like that, then says in Shulchan Aruch you can sell a chelik of it to a guy, so it won't require tefillah. And that on occasion we've had to do that.
But on a regular basis, that's not proper. Let's say a caterer has a lot of forks and knives and frying pans and everything. He's going to make a shutfus with the nochri in order to pat himself on the mitzvah Tevilas Keilim. So that's harama to pat himself from a mitzvah. That's not right. There's a mitzvah to do Tevilas Keilim. If you can't, if the kli is so gigantic, you can't fit it into the mikveh, so then you're megal. But if the alternative is to be matriach and to take it to the mikveh or to a river, sometimes the river is good for Tevilas Keilim, not always, then it's not right to do a harama to pat yourself from a mitzvah. Even if it's only, let's say, we assume Tevilas Keilim on glass Keilim is only midirabbanan. Most of the posts can assume it's only midirabbanan. So some say haram is muta on the rabbanans. You're not allowed to do haram on the rices. The pashtus says the haram is muta on the rabbanans on an isa the rabbanan, not on a mitzvah the rabbanan. If there's a mitzvah the rabbanan, you do a haram, you make a shutfus with a nachri. So at the end of the day, you didn't do the mitzvah. That's not right.
So I guess Rabbi Genack from Schachter, at what point do we determine that Tevilas Keilim was not necessary?
But Tevilas Keilim it is necessary, but if it's Kli Suda that you're using for, it has a contact with the food, so it requires Tevilah. And as I said, we only, if it's impossible to do, for example, it's a very, very big Kli, that's actually in Shulchan Aruch that you can sell a chelik to a guy. But otherwise we were always Tevilas Keilim. We had recently a shaila that there was a Kli. This was in from owner in a hotel. It was a Pesach program, and they were toivel all the kelim with a tremendous tircha, and some of the kelim somehow suddenly got mixed up. And they weren't sure whether they were toivel them. So the shaila was, is that bittul berov? So whether you say bittul on, is that a davishesh material? Because you could take them all back to the mikveh, and even though in Shulchan Aruch it says that if it's, for example, Kosher and Keilim, if it's a very big tircha, Ramor says that that's not called a davishesh material, and it would be bittul. That's a kli shel isur. Would that apply to a kli? Would that same halach apply to Hershel Keilim? That applies to Hershel Keilim. Would that apply to Tevilas Keilim? Because as Rabbi Schachter said, Tevilas Keilim, it could be that it's not an isur only to be mishtamish to kli. It's on the contrary, it's a mitzvah to be toivel the kli. So maybe that's not called the davishesh material. That should be, that should not be called, since it's a tircha, it's bottle. So be toivel all the keilim. At the end, it was just too much for everybody to be toivel. So I think, like Rabbi Schachter, remember that particular company was very close to David Cohen, that restaurant. He recommended at the time that the kelim that were not bottled, that they should sell they should sell those to a guy. I think that was the resolution at that time. But that itself is a shah. In terms of whether Tevilas Keilim is to be mishtamish with an isur or mitzvah. So I once heard from Van Soloveitchik. He said in the name of his father, the name of Moshe Soloveitchik, he thought, because there's a shy, let's say come to somebody's house who's not Tevilas Keilim. So he said a chidush. He said name of Moshe that it could be. I'm not sure halacha we hold this way, but he thought that it might not be also for the person who's just the guest to use those kelim because he's the chiv tefilas on the bailim. But in general, whether it's mitzvah, there's a shayla poskim also. What about, for example, if the kli belongs to a cotton? Is it us to be mishtamish with that kli? Because the cotton is not chayv in mitzvahs. But in terms of general OU policy, coming back to that, we did require and continue to require caterer has to be toivel all his kelim, forks, knives, and so on, even glasses that only rabbanon. All of them were not samech on this head of to consider them kli chayra. And as Rabbi Schachter said, we don't look to get around it in terms of mevatel the mitzvah by selling it, unless it's something that's a very, very large kli, or some other reason where it's not possible to retoivel it, because that's in Shulchan Aruch, that it's.
So once we're talking about bottles and kalim, we'll talk about another bottled product. And the question was posed, what level of bishul do we require for yain to be considered mevushal?
So in terms of OU policy, generally speaking, Rabbi Moshe has different. Rabbi Moshe holds that for bishul for yayin it's some hold that it has to be yala babuos, that is real boiling, which is 100 close to 12, right? Belske I think said that it's, I forgot the exact number that he said, for example, it was in the high 190s in Fahrenheit. But then Ramosha has it. Ramosha holds that it's really that the shir should be yatzoledes. So if you think it's yatzoledes, then he has a whole range where yatzoledes is, from 115 to I think 1 in Fahrenheit to 175. So so that's a lower level in terms of what's required in terms of bishul for yain. But we in the OU use a higher level. But now they have technologies, it's called flash pasteurization, that it reaches that very high temperature and very quickly. So it's actually only heated at that temperature for a very short time, and then it comes down. That's why some are of the opinion that that maybe that doesn't help in terms of bishul yain because it's not mekareya the yain at all. But generally speaking, the OU uses the higher temperature. But Ramosha has suggestion of yatzoledes, and he has, as I said, in general, in Ramosha Chuvas, he has a whole range in terms of yatzoledes. So
once we're talking about bishul, we're going to transition to a different type of bishul. And Schachter, if the Rashiva could elaborate a little bit. Someone was asking, are microwave ovens a problem of bishul in general and of bishul akum?
The Yerushalmi is quoted in Shulchan Aruch as having a suffix regarding other forms of bishul, whether they apply to bishul akum. So the Beis Yosef writes that since bishul akum is the rabbanon, what do you do when you have a sveika din in the Gemara? You have a teku. So we pass on a teku on and then the rabbanon is l'kula, and a teku on and then the rice is l'chumra. Suffix the rice is l'chumra. So the pashtus in the Yerushalmi is that if you have a different form of bishul, other than what was normal in the days of the Tanoim, that's the suffix, and we go l'kula on that. So really, we should have gone. I thought we should have gone l'kula on the prohibition of bishul akum in a microwave. It's a kind of bishul that didn't exist in the days of the Gemara. But they say Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was machmaran. So I think generally, if the food was already cooked from before and the nachri is just reheating it, so that's not bishul akum. But if the nachri took, let's say, raw hot dogs or raw French fries, and we don't eat raw potatoes, and then he heated it and he made it edible by, but he reheated it. He made it edible by the bishul and the microwave. The Rav Shlomo Zalman is machman that's included bishul akum. Yeah.
Just in terms of bishul akum by microwave, actually, I had this discussion once with Bishul Zaman. As you know, whether a microwave is considered Bishul Yisroel or Drabanan is a machlekes between Moshe and Igus Moshe and Bishul Zaman. Moshe says that since the Gemara says that Bishul B'chama is not Bishul because it's, and so that's because, so Moshe, this is the equivalent of Bishul B'chama because it's not with a fire with actual heat. It's, the microwave activates the molecules and heats it up internally. So Moshe holds that a microwave would be on Shabbos would be Bishul D'Oraisa, because now it's Derech Bishul Kach. So according to Moshe, nowadays, if you had a Dud Hashemes, since that's the normal way to cook nowadays in Israel, that is Derech Bishul, you'd be Chayiv on Shabbos. And Reb Shlomo Zalman thinks otherwise, that he thinks that most it's only an Ishud Rabbanon of Bishul. So I sort of assumed that Reb Shlomo Zalman, I met with him once about this, that he would be makel about microwaves. And he said, no, in terms of Bishul Akum, that was specifically about that. And he said, no, it's Rabbi Schachter just cited. So your policy is that we don't rely on, in terms of Bishul Akum, if it's cooked by a goy, that cooking it in a microwave that would fall under the category of Ma'ushan, and Ishun is not also by Bishul Akum.
So in terms of Bishul, someone's asking, a lot of times you come to an out-of-town community and there's people that for whatever reason they eat kosher in the house but don't necessarily keep kosher out of the house. Would somebody be allowed to eat in that house?
Strictly speaking, the Mishnah says in B'choris, a person doesn't have namanis on kashrus unless he always keeps kosher. If sometimes when he's out of the house, he'll eat in a restaurant, even if it's not so kosher, then strictly speaking, he doesn't have namanis. Moshe has a big chiddush. You had Moshe lived in Russia, communists. Yeah, he lived in Moscow for a few years before he came to America. So you had the situation there where the parents were still Shomer Mitzvahs and the children were communists and they didn't believe in anything. So the shaila was, when the parents are old and they move in with their children, do the children have their manas to tell them that all the food that they're giving them is kosher? Because the children eat treifus all the time. The children eat treifus in the house. But if the parents know their children so well, they feel their children will never tell them a lie, they will never be machshel them and eating treifus, even though treifus doesn't mean anything to them. But out of respect for their parents, they will never give them treifus. Moshe has a chiddush based on the Gemara that there's a concept of kim le begave milsehu. If I know that the fellow's telling the truth, so I can rely on that. Yeah, but that's it's rare. A lot of times he can't rely on that because he doesn't believe in kashrus. It doesn't mean anything to him. Same thing, let's say mikveh. The mikveh lady has to have namanis. If the woman in charge of the mikveh, she herself doesn't care. She doesn't observe Taras HaMishpacha. She doesn't, so she keeps kashrus, she doesn't keep Taras HaMishpacha, then she's not in the menace to say that she made the hashokeh. She's not in the menace to say that the woman's hair, all the hair went under the surface of the water. You only have namanis in an area where you observe that area. The Ramah has an interesting truth. The Ramah lived in Poland and Krakow. They used to buy the wine from Italy, and the Jews in Italy who manufactured the wine, who made the wine, they themselves would drink trefa wine. How did they explain that? What did it make? So they said they drink Kosher wine because in Italy all the water is polluted, and you can't drink the water. So since it's a big shas hatchak, so they decided on their own that therefore the stam yenim is mutter. But B'maisa they drank stam yenim. So the Ramah was asked the question, how can we rely on these Jewish manufacturers in Italy? They themselves drink stam yenim. How can we rely on them that they're giving us kosher wine? So he's Mekel, and he says, no, the Jewish winemakers in Italy talked it into themselves that they have a heter, but they understood that if they live in Poland where the water was not polluted, they would be careful with the goyish wine. They held that they had a heter. The heter is wrong, but since they thought that they had a heter, so the Ramah's Mekel, that's not called chasher ala dava ala dona v'lamida. But normally, if a person doesn't observe any given mitzvah, he doesn't have namanis in that area of halacha.
Just in terms of the tshuva that Ramosha cites, Ramosha bases this on the Sugyan Ksubas of Kimble, but he speaks about when he was living in Moscow, the children knew about their parents, that they wouldn't fool them and so on. But when Ramosha concludes his tshuva, he says that it doesn't relate. First, he says it's only b'shas chak. These people had no other eitzah because they were living at their with their parents, and the children weren't from me the way he describes them. They ate machalos asus, they were koifrim. That's Ramosha's language in the tshuva. But he says la'acherim, he's not mekil. So in the normal circumstance, I mean, this shayla could come up. Somebody's the rabbi in a local community. It's awkward for him not to eat at Balabatim's houses and things like that. But it's a person doesn't keep kosher outside the house. I think something the dichotomy that was common in America. Inside he keeps kosher, outside he doesn't. But Ramosha really, he's not really makel on that. He's only makel in this extraordinary shashat chak. As Rabbi Schachter, Ramosha writes this Jew, he says when he was in Moscow, so they're living under a communist regime. There was no other eitzah at all. But generally speaking, Ramosha says lachem is not makel, is not makel. So it would have to be an extraordinary shashat chak. But if a person is not, basically not, he's not makbid about kashrus for Hawaii, he's eating outside, he would have no nemanas.
So Jake Nussbaum just sent a message. He wants to know, in terms of this nemanas, if someone is not makbid on bedikas talayim, do they lose their nemanas?
They're not trusted in talayim.
Yeah.
They're not trusted on talayim. In other areas of kashrus, they would be believed. Other things they are careful about. Just talayim, they think it's a joke.
So, Rabbi Genack, one of the questions that we got was, what is the policy of the OU with regards to giving Hershel to restaurants where non-Torah values are glorified, for example, like a kosher sports bar? Well,
the OU policy is that in general, that in order for a restaurant to have an OU, the environment in the ambience has to be Torah-dik as well. So therefore, I remember we had, when I first came to Europe, there was a request for a restaurant with a belly dancer and things like that. So we or different kinds of clubs, we rejected it. A sports club, of course, depends. We actually, if they're just showing, let's say we have one restaurant like that in Genack. It's the ambiance is very, it's appropriate. People like sports, so they're showing sports on the screen there or something like that. So that we would do. But generally speaking, in terms of the the fundamental question, we make sure that that the ambiance and also the halach is observed. For example, in terms of live music while they're having a meal, since that's Zeichel Churban, we don't permit that. There were many restaurants, so unless it's a Sudas Mitzvah. So we had restaurants that wanted to have live music and they serve wine in these restaurants. So that's not appropriate. And we didn't give the hashgacha. Either we didn't give the hashgacha or we didn't let them have the live music.
So the Schachter, a lot of the participants today eventually will go into our bonus in different communities, and they're asking, how should a smaller VOD deal with some of these issues? The OU is a much larger organization, has more muscle, can be more selective, but sometimes you're stuck with balabatim that want a certain thing. Is there any hadracha in terms of how a smaller VOD or Rav out of town should deal with places that want to be kosher certified but might not have the best ambiance?
Look, you have to be b'cha b'mir Torah. Sometimes you're in a situation where all the choices are no good. You choose the least of all the evils. So if the alternative is going to be, it's not going to be a kosher restaurant. So it's better to have that it should be a kosher restaurant and not have a kosher ambiance. Okay? Got no choice.
Yeah, I want to emphasize what Rabbi Schachter says. Obviously, everything, especially if you're in a local van, local community, requires on the part of the Rav, discretion and sensitivity and intelligence in terms of how you handle it, because, little by little, you'll build it, and it'll be a different kind of a reality that you'll build. We know the famous story about Bishul Yisroel that, little by little, communities that he built things, so certain things he wasn't makbid about, and then the reality changed completely. So certain things that are possible that the OU can do are just not likely in a local community. And for example, the OU requires, or we at least initially, that all our restaurant owners, or we try to have, I shouldn't say because there are exceptions, so the idea is that one of them, which was grandfathered in, is owned by somebody not Jewish. That's probably one of our easiest restaurants in terms of compliance. But that's because he doesn't know the whole Shulchan Aruch, just would repeat it back to you. But or he thinks that he doesn't, as others might know. But the things that the OU can do in Manhattan that are not possible in local Vaden. So they'd have to set up a system that's a meaningful system of a Yotze Nichnas and checking. I remember when I used to learn by the Rav in Onset one summer. So there was a local bakery there. The man, I don't think he wasn't Jewish at all. I don't think he was Jewish, certainly not from. The store was open on Shabbos. I don't think he was Jewish, but the Rav arranged and someone checking some of the ingredients and so on, and he relied on it. And that was the only bakery there in town. So, it depends on the circumstance, and you requires, I said, discretion and intelligence.
Okay. Rabbi Genack, there were some questions also posed about non-food items, and they wanted to know. They see a lot of people go. They see, aluminum foil pans. They see bottled water. Why do these items have a hechsher on them?
Well, first of all, there are products that are probably inherently kosher but have a hechsher. I mean, the most demonstrative of these are different kinds of detergents. So they're nifsa machila 100 times over, and they're dangerous to eat. But we have to remember that the OU is, aside from a kashrus symbol, it's also a marketing symbol, and it's not that. And many companies want it because they think marketing-wise it's good for them, not only for the the kosher consumer, Jewish consumer, that they think that there's a perception, whether accurate or not, that if it has an OU, it has a different, higher level in terms of quality, in some cases in terms of hygiene. That's not necessarily what the OU affirms. OU just means that it's kosher. And so we often will tell companies, this is inherently kosher. It doesn't need supervision, but they're interested in it for their marketing reasons. So there might be products, as I mentioned, for example, when I first came to the OU, it's not the case anymore, but a lot of the OU was posited on Procter & Gamble. And there used to be two departments for the Procter & Gamble. There was the edible department, and there was what we call the non-edible department. Remember the name of the person from P&G we used to deal with, and that gross, his name was Davis. We would meet them each year, and that was a very significant company, very large company. I mean, at the time, it kept competitors dealt with it with respect. They used to refer to P&G as Procter and God, and so there are products that don't require supervision, and might be kosher.
So, Schachter.
Aluminum cans, by the way, some of them, I'm not saying they're not kosher, but there are, in the production of the aluminum, there are different oils that are used. They're used hot, and so those things, have to be monitored to make sure that they're kosher oils. But there are certainly many products that, especially, as I said, detergents and things like that, that really don't need supervision, per se.
I would just add to what you said, Rabbi Genack. We had recently an application a couple of years ago for a company that manufactures countertops, and sure enough, they're using non-kosher oils, and they wanted ashkoch in it. Not the countertops achila, but if we're keeping them, if we're having them certified. Meat is a very hot topic, especially through the barbecue season, and there's several different questions. I guess we'll start with Rabbi Genack and we'll go to Schachter. The first one is, how does the OU view the ethical treatment of shechita and the animals and the conditions that the shechita is under?
Well, we're sensitive to it. Shechita itself is, first of all, is scientifically is probably one of the most humane ways, if not the most humane, of killing an animal. The irony is that some of the other ways, I've also used to speak about this, in terms of shooting the animal with a stun gun in the head, unless you really hit the exact right spot, you can see sometimes the animal cringing in pain afterwards. And shechita generally, within just a few seconds, the animal is insensate. So it really is a very humane fashion. We're concerned about Sabbath Chaim. As a matter of fact, the Ramban says that the reason, the bracha that we make on shechita is because of Sabbath Chaim. Because this shechita is memayit in the Sabbath Chaim. So there was actually a interesting study done by he wrote a book. It's called Shechita in the year 2000. Rabbi Levinger, who himself is originally he was in Basel, now he was in Israel, who himself is a veterinarian. He wrote a very interesting book about simply the science of Shechita, demonstrating how the animal becomes insensate so quickly, and maybe actually a much better way. But having said that, it's something the Torah itself concerns itself with. And one of the big advocates, it's just important to know the history, in the end of the 1950s and the 1960s, there was attempted to have, in terms of when the Humane Slaughter Act was passed. So Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rav, was very involved. This was unusual for him. He was very involved in terms of mobilizing the Jewish community to make sure that shechita was not opposed, as it is in many countries now in Europe. And he there's an exemption. Not only was there an exemption for kosher slaughter in the bill, which is still the bill that's intact to this day, but it also, there was scientific evidence that was presented to Congress, and there's a finding in that bill that not only is there an exemption for religious reasons, but that kosher slaughter is indeed humane. As a matter of fact, the Rav went and testified before Congress in 1960s or something, in the early 60s at that time, in terms of this legislation. He was very involved also in creating the pen, which we tried to use, but at least the one we recommend, which was called the Rav worked on this, and then he gave it over to the ASPCA, the so-called animal rights organization. But of course, we have opponents to shechita and PETA, which are radical animal, I don't know if the right word is animal rights organizations that misrepresent shechita. I was in one of the important animal rights, or I wouldn't say animal rights advocates, but is a woman who was a professor of in the University of Denver, and
Temple Grandin.
Temple Grandin, who wrote a book. Temple Grandin is an extraordinary woman. I became friendly with her. She herself is autistic, and because of that, she feels that she can understand animals, and what their feelings in terms of stress and so before shechita. So we want to be mamait, minimize that as much as possible. She wrote a wonderful book. It's called Thinking in Pictures. So these are things that we really factor in, and we even in this one of the shechitas that we have, doing when we're bashkin, the PETA was really one of the organizations that looked to target the Rubashkins very, very unfairly. And we had a protege of Temple Grandin inspect the plant and set up the procedures there to try as much as possible to limit any stress on the animal. Erica Vogue is her name. She still goes to the plant, I believe, to this day, or she sends one of her assistants to go. And so we care about it. We want it to be done in the most efficient and sensitive way as possible. The Rav was very much for a standing pen because he thought that, that will, just protecting shechita and promoting it, that also in limiting the stress on the animal. However, the Rabbanut in Israel requires what they call shechita menachas because they want it to be shechita mamal lamata. The Rav himself was opposed to that, and I remember he once told me, "Go tell the chief rabbi," which I did, that you should look at the Ram. That the Ram says when he speaks about hilchas shechita, that the Ram says that shoknas and ben omedet ben rovetzet. So you see, you can shech the animal standing as well. Not that it helped in terms of the policy of the Rabbanut, but this is something that we work on, and it's interesting because of this concern. The Rabbanut changed, or the Israeli government changed that now. Just this is only several months ago. It changed its policy. Most of the shechita for coming to Israel comes from South America, for Central America, and they require now pens, but they require to invert the animal in the pen. But it's not just a shechita on the ground. Whether that shechita is more or less, stressful for the animal, I'm very skeptical. But certainly the aesthetics of it looks better.
Thank you, Schachter. There's a lot of questions about Masaira, especially of Ofos and Shechita. Would the Rashid be able to talk a little bit about, is turkey considered kosher or not?
The Gemara in Perek Elotrefus, the Mishnah in Perek Elotrefus tells you the Simona how to identify whether any given bird is kosher or not. So then the Gemara tells a story that the Menachem who lived in Bavel once came upon a new bird that they never heard of before. And it had all the 5 simonim to identify that it's a kosher bird. And they were shechting and eating it. And after a while, they realized that they misjudged and they made a mistake and it was a treifa bird. So Rashi, who usually just gives pirush on the Gemara, Rashi rarely gives a psak halacha. But in Chulan, a lot of times Rashi does give a psak halacha. Rashi psak about tam kikalav deraisim mimina is b'mashu. And a lot of other, in Chulan, there are a lot of Rashis, but he gives psak halacha. So Rashi on that Gemara says, the Amaroi made a mistake and they misjudged, and they thought that a non-kosher bird was kosher. So it's a good idea. We should avoid eating bird unless you have a tradition that it's a kosher bird. You shouldn't rely on the 5 simonim that the Mishnah has because you may be misjudged. So the Ramah quotes this from the Sefer Isa Veheta by the Rabbeinu Yonah Ashkenazi. There's Rabbeinu Yonah Girondi, that was the Ramban's Mechutin. He was living in Spain. And this Sefer Isa Veheta Horach by the Rabbeinu Yonah Ashkenazi never quotes any Svardish poskim. It's all Ashkenazi. In Yeridea, they quote the Isa Veheta Horach every page in Yeridea. So the Ramah quotes this Isa Veheta, that the minig Ashkenaz is, like the Rashi says, you don't eat any bird unless you have a tradition that from earlier generations it's a kosher bird because you may be misjudged. So that's the shaila. So let's say we have a tradition that chickens are kosher. So what if the chicken is slightly different from the chicken that we know? So there always is a slight difference. If it's kemat exactly the same, then we say the fact we have a tradition that this chicken is kosher carries over to this chicken also. It's not such a major difference between the two. Turkeys are a different min though. So that's a shayla. When Columbus came back from America to Spain, he brought back the turkey with him. And in Spain, they don't have this chumrah. This is a chumrah from Rashi, from Ashkenazim. When the Rabbeinu Yonah and the Yisrael had the Ramah quotes it, but the Mechaber doesn't quote that chumrah. So when Columbus brought back the turkey to Spain, so all the Spanish Jews saw it has all the simonim of a kosher bird, so they started eating it. Then apparently 50 years later, Ashkenazim saw that Achenu HaSfardim are eating turkey, so they assumed they must have had a tradition that it's kosher. They never had any tradition. Columbus brought it way after he discovered America. He brought it back to Spain. So there never was a tradition. So strictly speaking, we're really in violation of the minig, not to eat any fowl unless you have a tradition. The Talmud Achronim say, no, we have a tradition. The American Indians were from the West 10 tribes, and they had a tradition that turkey was kosher. What are you talking about? The American Indians that they lost their jobs. But they gave other explanations. They said the turkey is not the same as a chicken. Turkey is very different from a chicken, not the same as a chicken. But the whole thing is only a minig. I think Eretz Yisrael consumes more turkey than any other country in the world. And the minig became that we do eat turkey. On the side of the page in Yerideh, they quote that the Shachar was insistent that it's not right, you shouldn't eat turkey. There's one Rabbi in Yeshiva, Rabbi Horowitz. He's a descendant of Shalom. Shalom's family name was Horowitz. So he said he has relatives who will not eat turkey. They'll eat chazer on Yom Kippur, but they won't eat turkey because they're descendants from the Shalom. So strictly speaking, according to the minig of the Ramah, according to the minig of Rashi, we really shouldn't be eating turkey. But it became a minig that turkey is an exception to the rule.
A few years ago, I had the pleasure of having Shmuel Kamenetsky, Yeshiva of Philadelphia, and his wife as guests at our house for Shabbos. And he told me that he doesn't eat turkey. But he told me his father, Rabbi Yaakov, would eat turkey, but his wife, that means his mother, came from a town in Europe that the minig was not to eat turkey, because we don't have a Messiah on turkey. So he himself follows the minig of his mother. His father, being the gracious man he was, accepted the minig of his mother, and he told me he doesn't eat turkey.
Okay, Genack, in terms of OU policy, people hear different things about hashgachas.
I just want to, even if a person is makbid not to eat turkey, I think somebody had asked this question about, let's say you have a minig not to eat turkey and you eat at a person's house who does have, serves turkey on occasion. Do you have to worry about the Keilim? As I don't think you have to be machmir because it's really not eating turkey. So there's a chumrah. Shach says in general that on hummus we don't say tam ki'ika. And I don't think it means that if there's no misoy and the thing that it's us, it means you should be cautious for it. And certainly if you're a guest in somebody's house, because I know when Shmuel was by us, he ate on our Keilim. He didn't think the Keilim were usher because we serve turkey. Otherwise, I think you'd have a hard time going to a good convention. The cloud, the Ramah says that if you eat in a person's house, and there were different opinions about chaylev. We're not talking about chum about turkey. We're talking about anisa kavis. So you can rely. There seems to be in the Ramah even talking about even if it's a ben yomer. So I don't think you have to worry about the kelim if Rabbi Horowitz goes eat in somebody's house, he could still eat there.
So Genack, just as a little bit of a follow-up, but in terms of other types of Yisurim, a lot of people out there hear conflicting reports about hashgachas, what they do allow, what they don't allow. What's the OU's policy in general with regards to mevatel isul chadchil? Can you rely upon it? What about even b'diavad? And what role does that have in hashgacha?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean b'diavad. B'diavad means that you won't mevatel chadchila. So if something becomes bittul, it's mutter. To say otherwise, the person is not b'kovis. I mean, I don't think there's not a chumrah not to rely on bittul in the Torah. But we don't rely, on bittul lechatchila in terms of hashgachas. Even if it's a goyish company, we don't, if the amount that's there is very small and it would, let's say it's less than shishim, would be bittul, we will not lechatchila give a hashgach on that. But Moshe has a tshuva to Rabbi Karelitz that he says even a kli that's an einabin, let's say it's a factory that makes non-kosher and kosher in the same factory, and they use kelim that they use the same equipment, but it's an Eina ben Yomo. So that's machlokes. Is that based on bittul, not the voice is called machlokes? It's machlokes mechaber and Amos relates to Pesach. Machlokes the Rashba and the Bedek Abayis. So Moshe says that you should not rely on it because it's, to use Moshe's phrase, it's mechua hadava. So even sometimes if something would be bottle, or something would be mutter, but Moshe has this concept of mechua hadava that is inappropriate. So in terms of OU policy, we for example, if it's a kli that's an ene ben yomo, so l'chatchila we will not, and the only way to run this factory is that it's an ene ben yomo. So we won't give hashgacha to that if it's always just that they're not kosher and clean. If we know that the keilim were treif, became non-kosher, we require koshering, and we don't rely on bittul is l'chatchila. But if you ask, but if something became bittul, will we rely on that? The answer is yes.
So, Schachter, is there, some people are asking, is there nafkamina between bittul isur l'chatchila and bittul chametz b'rayv when it comes to Pesach?
Same thing. If you know that there's an ingredient of chametz, you don't give a Hershel. Even though it's bittul, even though chametz kadim Pesach is bittul b'shishim, or chametz bit Pesach is b'masha, chametz even on Erev Pesach is bittul b'shishim, but you don't give a Hershel on a product based on the fact that you have all the treif ingredients are bittul b'shishim. That's a davar mechuvah to give such a Hershel.
Okay, we have a couple more questions, and then, time is running out of here. Rabbi Genack, the question came through, if the OU takes into account, you mentioned, about the animals and things like that. What about in terms of workers and compliance? Does the OU take that into account, or is that left to other authorities to take care of?
Well, our expertise is limited to kashrus. If we know that there's something which is violating, which is patently violating American law, or inappropriate, selling product that's, I just had this past week, as an example. Somebody called us that there was a company that was packaging product, and it was, he said it was underweight. And we sent our mashgiach in Baltimore actually to check it out. And indeed, that was the case. And we stopped them. The company itself, when we went back to them, said that it was inadvertent. Somehow something was wrong with the scales. But we required them to recall the product as well. So if it's something that we know that's inappropriate, either in terms of standards or, as I said, in this example of weight, but, several years ago, this goes back a while, the conservative movement wanted to start the Hershel, I think it was called Hershel Tzedek. But they wanted to speak about what level of payment the workers were getting and so on. So that's not our area. That's up to the whether it's OSHA, USDA, FDA to set those standards. They have the expertise and the authority to do it. That's not something we do. But as I say, if we know something is wrong, we will take action, as we just did. This actually happened just last week.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Schachter, people are asking about non-dairy creamers that might have some type of dairy inside of them. Could one still use them in their coffee after a fleischigen meal?
There was a discussion recently at all the kashrus organizations get together a few times a year. So the recent meeting, they had a discussion. I think the overwhelming majority of them thought that it was permissible. That's not called the milk is kosher, except that the question is whether the coffee is milchik parve. So if it turns out that you have shishim against the cholav the parve creamer, you have a little bit of milk in it. When you mix it in with the coffee, you have shishim. So it's parve. That's not a violation of everything is kosher.
If you intend to if you're mixing it, to move it, you mevatl it, and you're going to put it in something that's fleischigs. So that is mevatl, so that the shach says. But if you're just putting it into your coffee, like the Schachter said, so at that point it's bottle, you're going to drink it at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that wraps up most of the questions that we have today. I want to thank Rabbi Genack and Schachter for giving me this time to answer everyone's shilas today. And we want to thank everybody for joining us for the last several hours. It's been a long day. Hope you gained something from it. We will send out, hopefully, later this week, a survey so we can get some feedback from you in terms of what you enjoyed and what you enjoyed more. And otherwise, wish everyone a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your week, and stay safe.